Hi everyone, this is our last video for the week. We're going to talk about the end of the Chinese Empire. And so during the 18th century, we see European states increasing their interactions with China. And the basis of this, or the foundations of these increased interactions, are the trading empires they built in the Indian Ocean. And so now we start to see that these trading empires, the English, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the French, are starting to expand these trading empires further east and into the Pacific and into China. And the Chinese approach is to restrict the English and the Dutch to the city of Guangzhou, or to otherwise known as Canton. So it's to say, hey, you can come here, but you can only trade in this particular city. And there was a high demand, a high European demand for Chinese products, silk and porcelain, but a low Chinese demand for European products. There was nothing really that the Europeans were offering that the Chinese wanted to buy. And so there started to be a problem where there's a trade imbalance, or there's a trade deficit, where a lot of European currency is going into China, in particular a lot of precious metals like silver, and there's nothing coming out, or the only things that are coming out of China are non-currency and objects like porcelain and silk that aren't really going to be traded more than once. And so Europeans respond by using this process of triangulation that we've looked at in the history of India. And the product they use to triangulate is the crop, as the drug, called opium. And so the British cultivate opium in India and sell it in China. And so this is a drug that the Chinese population quickly becomes highly attracted to. There's a large demand for it. And this is a way for the British not to lose too much silver, not to lose too much precious metal, but instead to trade opium for Chinese silk and to establish a trading balance that favors them. And so this drug, the opium drug, is starting to run rampant in China. And you're starting actually to see an imbalance the other way, where China is losing currency because the Chinese are buying so much of this drug. And so the Qing attempt to halt this trade, and so they seize the opium stocks held by the British in 1839. This leads to the First Opium War. And this is where the Chinese discover that the centuries of isolation following the rule of the Yuan dynasty, the sort of repurification of China led by the Ming dynasty and continued by the Qing dynasty, has left them a long way behind the European countries in terms of technology. So the Chinese are still trying to use wooden vessels, kind of outdated guns, and they basically get cleaned up. They get comprehensively defeated, and the British force the Chinese to agree to the Treaty of Nanjing, which gives the British access to more Chinese ports. So previously they've been limited to this port of Guangzhou. Now the Chinese, by this defeat, have been forced to open new ports to European trade and the selling of opium in China. In the mid-19th century, we have the Taiping Rebellion, which is one of the key terms of this week. It's an important moment in Chinese history when you see the first rise of anti-Manchu sentiment, where now you're starting to have Han Chinese groups that are saying, we don't want to be ruled by the Manchu, they're not properly Chinese, they're outsiders, and at the same time we see that they're not able to protect us from these European powers. And so you have one of the bloodiest civil wars at all time that lasts for about 15 years, and you have 20 to 30 million people die. So compare that with 600,000 people that died during the American Civil War. This is a much more bloody, a much more destructive conflict. The British and the French seize this opportunity to fight and win a second opium war, and to capture the city of Beijing, to drive the Qing out of Beijing, basically in total humiliation. Now, the Qing dynasty rallies in the second half of the 19th century, or really the last quarter of the 19th century. Taiping Rebellion, the Opium Wars, forced the Chinese to modernize the army, to try and bring together Western technology and Confucian values. And so they are led now by the Emperor Guangxu and his dowager aunt Shixi, and they are able to defeat a French effort to invade China from the south. They are nevertheless still defeated by the Japanese in 1895. Remember that by this point, the Japanese have become a pretty modern nation when it comes to military and to the technology. They are still unable to control European trade and involvement in ports in China. This is leading to a situation where if Europeans commit crimes in Chinese soil, they are tried in European courts. They're not subject to the same Chinese laws. There's this trading imbalance, which is making things difficult for the Chinese. And this means that there's going to be another rebellion against the Qing called the Boxer Rebellion. And this is another nationalist response to continued European incursions. And so once again, the Chinese rebel. They say, we want to be ruled on our own. We want to maintain our national sovereignty, which again, this is language from the West. It shows you, kind of like we saw in India, that Western language is being used by Asian peoples to try and resist European control, the growth of European control. In this instance, it doesn't help. Once again, the outdated Chinese armies are defeated. Europeans seize control of Beijing, and once again, the Qing dynasty, despite efforts to reform, like the 100 Days reform, is close to collapse. With the death of Guangxu and Shixi in 1908, there's really little future for the Qing dynasty going forward, and the future of China is going to be the story of who's going to take control in the power vacuum that's left by the collapse of the Qing dynasty, and how are they going to thread this needle of adopting some aspects of Western technology that are clearly superior to state-of-the-art Chinese technology at this point? How are they going to maintain Chinese values and traditional Chinese culture? And to what extent are they going to maintain or recover Chinese sovereignty and independence? I hope you've enjoyed this week's material, and I'll see you for the last week of the semester next time.